Chris was so important to our company. He was a liaison between the shop and the management. He really just was so good with the associates.
Well, he was the #1 person at Sabre for many, many years, right up to my retirement days. And he was the person, I'll call it the go-to person. Chris, we need to do this. And Chris would just literally go out the door and do it. And it was remarkable. And came to us just as one new worker. He didn't helicopter in at a high level. He came in as just a person, but then he just ascended literally overnight into being the #1 technical person at Sabre Yachts.
My very first memory of Chris is when he came in for his job interview. Normally people come in dressed fairly casual, or they're dressed in a business suit. He came in a little sweater vest, and I don't know, it just hit me as cute. I'll never forget that.
Chris has certainly had an impact on me professionally, I would say more so than anyone, in the course of my career with Sabre and Back Cove. So, I mean, he was certainly a wonderful mentor and leader. He was also, one of the toughest guys I ever worked for, which was fantastic. Chris was wonderful in that he pushed people beyond where they thought they could go, knowing full well that it was certainly in their best interest, and made them stronger individuals. And we see that in our boat builders on the shop floor. We see that in our managers and leaders working at both Sabre and Back Cove today. And we have, really all of that to thank Chris for, and the impact that he's had on these and continues to have, years after his passing.
It was shocking to me, I think. When my first conversations with Chris, I remember him asking these questions that were so difficult to answer because they were such sharp questions. They were such important questions. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, I'm supposed to know all of that?
Yeah, Chris Evans was a great guy to work for. I always remember I believe it was my first day at work here, and I was still in college, and I was working here part-time, and I had just started and just got involved in a project, and Chris came down to introduce himself, and we got talking he was great for conversation and in-depth conversations. And I remember I made the comment, something like talking about how the company did something, and I said, you don't do this, or we do that, you do that. And he corrected me right there and said, it's not you, it's we. And I always remember that as being, that clicked. It's like part of a team here.
Chris is really one of the major reasons I got involved with Sabre. When I first came to visit the company during my due diligence, he was the one who showed me around, and we were at the time, there were 35 people in this building, and the place had remained open thanks to Chris and Nancy and Brenda, and without them there would not have been a company to look at. And it was very clear as I was walking around with him that not only was he a highly competent individual, but he was also one who had created a culture that I felt very comfortable with, and I liked a great deal. And although I knew nothing about boats, I could tell that this was a company that had all the right elements to be successful. And that in part was, a great part was because of Chris. Wherever we went, I could see him recreate that culture. And I think his legacy exists today, and I think it exists in great part because he found in Aaron someone that had a similar sense of what a company should be, which is to many of us is just another extended family.
I think Chris had a lot to do with helping to develop the culture in the shop. and was very close to a lot of the team, and that sense of family that we have on a larger scale, I think, came from a lot of levels, and I think Chris was a big piece of that.
You know, Chris and his position being the president and having such a history with Sabre, sometimes you look at folks like that as almost unapproachable, and Chris was so approachable, and he was so personable, and he went out of his way to touch base with you, and it didn't have to be anything about work. And listening to some of his stories, he's just he had a hell of a heart. He was a fantastic individual.
Chris was great. I mean, he, just a real nice guy, and he knew everybody in the shop, and he would talk to everybody, and he would talk to people and ask them about their lives, and their kids and what they were doing, and he, and he's very smart. I mean, he remembered everything. He had, if customer service ever had a question, Chris would remember that boat, what happened, who owned it. I mean, he just really had a really strong memory, and he knew a lot.
I think Chris Evans is one of the people who understood the quality goals of the company, and he was always looking for a better way to do it, but would never let anything get in the way of getting a quality product out the door.
We used to have a plaque up on the wall, Sabre Pride. I mean, fierce pride. And Chris personified that. I mean, Chris loved the company. He was quality, and not, I mean, he didn't just tell you what we expected. I mean, he could do it all too. So, I mean, he could walk the walk and talk the talk.
Yeah, Chris was more than a boss. Chris was a friend. He was an ally. Being in quality control, I took it very seriously. Chris drove it into me that I was the advocate for that boat. And if I wasn't comfortable with it, that, just say so, and we would have to make it right. And he made it very clear that the only person that could override what I said was him.
I remember a project that was critical path to the Sabre team, to the Sabre as a company. We were wrapping up the punch list on a prototype to get it out to a fall-winter boat show. We ran up against the Christmas holiday. We worked Christmas Eve, not just Christmas Eve day through the night, and saw the sun come up. And Chris, as the production manager or the president of the company at the time, I can't recall, spent that time with a tool belt on, working right beside us.
He cared deeply about people, and that showed. And he expected, as a supervisor, as when I became a supervisor, he expected the same from me.
I remember being mostly impressed by his utter respect for the men and women that built these boats every day, that came in every day and gave it their all. And his respect for them and the way he would look out for them really says a lot. It really says a lot about him as a person.
And he sent me a nice email after I was 6 months or so into my supervisor position, telling me I was doing a good job, and also he had, gave me some good pointers about the way he did things over the years, and treat everybody fair. If they're not getting the job done, you need to move on from them. It's a professional thing, not a friend thing. So gave me some good, and I still have that email today, and I keep it, and I do read it from time to time. It meant a lot to me that he sent that to me.
Yeah, Chris was a great mentor. Missed very much. He had a great way of telling me, or explaining to me. He never told me anything. That's why I respect him as much as I do. He always would communicate very well with me and make sure that if I made some decisions as a young manager that, are you sure you really want to do that? And he'd always make me go back a second time and think about it. But he always made sure that everybody felt comfortable here and made sure that everybody
knew that they were important. And I think he plays a big role in the success of a lot of us and the success of a lot of us managers. And I really, like I said, I miss him and I'd like to thank him for it.
Well, Chris, the big thing that hit me about Chris was a passionate man. He was passionate about the associates in the shop, and he was passionate about our boats. And examples of that were in our quarterly meetings. Chris took the time to put together music along with a slideshow of different activities that were going in the shop, plus customers using our boats and such. So put a lot of effort into that, where I think he wanted the associates to know this is what you're building out here is what our customers are using out there and enjoying. So he really wanted to make that connection.
He would go around and shoot photographs in the shop almost every day, and then spend hours at home setting his. He was a great lover of music, odd folk music stuff, I guess you'd call it. A lot of great, main artists that never really made it to the top, but Chris somehow found their music and set these slideshows to music.
I would not be overstating it if I said that Chris Evans probably had the biggest single impact on my professional life.
I really miss Chris. I think when we lost Chris, there was a compass that went missing for a while. North wasn't there. We had to find that again over time. Chris had a very great ability to look at all the different aspects of boat building and boat sales and look at a greater good, not only for Sabre, but for the customers and for the brand. And he really, really was that North that we looked to.
He was a great person to share ideas with, bounce things off him, and he always had opinions about things. He had a lot of empathy for the people that he worked with here.
Again, he always wanted us to build the best, and we try to do that for him.
The things I remember fondly about him, many of them, one of them he couldn't dance. He was a terrible dancer. I'll just throw that one out.
There were a number of times when he'd be talking to a customer on the phone and he'd be referring to, the factory as the yard, which was great because that kind of gives it more of a homey feel, something instead of a cold factory, more of a warm boatyard. And that's the way he was.
After he was diagnosed with his sickness, he kind of joked about the sickness. At the time, he was trying to lose weight. He found the perfect weight loss program. He said, but I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. You kind of want to laugh, but you kind of don't, to something like that. But that was his humor a little bit.
It was just a fabulous experience working with Chris. He was a very unique individual too soon.
I loved speaking with him. I loved walking around the plant with him. I loved the fact that people would come up to him and ask him questions, not only about boats, the boats that they were building, but also about things that they had on their minds. And he always had the time, the inclination, and the intelligence to answer. And I think he was highly respected by everybody, and I think missed by everybody.
I always think to myself in every situation, what would Chris think about this? And I will, for the rest of my life, I know I will do that. He was a really big person in the great sense of the word.
He was a good friend, and we're all still very sad that he's not with us any longer.
I mean, his pride and enthusiasm was just unmatched. I mean, he is kind of like the soul of the company,